Hey team, what's going on? Welcome to another episode of the Lifestyle You podcast. It's your host, Lacey Iskra, and on today's episode, I'm actually going to be sharing my recent experience with my first plant ceremony that I took part in a weekend or two ago, depending on when you're listening to this podcast. But I was super lucky to be invited to the plant ceremony, and it was my first experience. So definitely gone back and forth on sharing this experience or not with you guys, just because it is a little bit taboo, I guess would be a good way to explain it. And then it's also just not like common knowledge, and it's definitely a vulnerable share for me as well. So I decided to just go for it because that was something that came up in my plant ceremony that I'll talk about, of just me not necessarily always trusting my voice. And so I'm excited to share that with you guys. But first, I really just want to explain what a plant ceremony even is, because when I asked you guys on my Instagram story, a lot of you didn't even know what it was, which is not really a surprise. I've known about plant medicine for quite some time and been studying it, researching it, listening to other people's experience, and have wanted to partake in a ceremony for probably 3 years. It's been on my vision board. So it feels pretty cool to have that come true. So I'm just going to get into what a plant ceremony is in general, and it is there to be a source of healing. So obviously, healing is up to us. It's done from the very core of our being, which I like to call the spirit. And the part where the plant medicine comes in is it just helps get you started. And so it is essentially like either helping you getting started on a spiritual awakening or spiritual journey, or it just heightens that experience, or it gives you just your next lesson, and it just helps you heal in general, whether that's detoxing from emotions, from something that's happened mentally or physically. It's just meant to speed up the process, I guess, a little bit. So in shamanic culture, these plants are not considered a drug. And that's what a lot of people will compare them to, but it's actually considered a highly respected and sacred medicine. And shamans believe that these plant medicines are deeply connected to the spirit, the source, and can easily show us non-ordinary realms where great knowledge can be attained, growth can be accelerated, and true healing can take place. And so obviously, just reading that, I wanted to do it, like bring me to the realms where I can get just a heightened sense of who I am and just some things that I need to work on. And it is super important, and they always talk about this, that you should be called to plant medicine. So for me, it was kind of out of nowhere. I mean, I think it probably happened when I started having my spiritual awakening like 4 years ago, and I just started like following more people in this realm and hearing about plant medicine. And then I found myself just researching it and super interested. And I have looked around at different places where I wanted to do a plant ceremony experience. They're very popular in places like Peru, because that's kind of where they came from, Costa Rica and things like that. But I never really pushed it. I wanted an opportunity to land in my lap in a way, I guess, which I just had a feeling that it would. And luckily for me, it did. And I didn't have to go to Peru, which of course I would love to go there someday, but I was lucky enough to partake in this quite close to home, which is amazing. And so these plant medicines are to be ingested and experimented in a ceremonial context. So they never want anyone just like doing these plant ceremonies at home by themselves for their first, not knowing what they're doing, not having anyone to guide the experience. And you're also supposed to have a trained shaman. And these shamans' jobs during one of these ceremonies is to join the client in his or her journey, hold a really safe space, protect, guide, and intervene if needed. So it's kind of like you just have a little mentor or a teacher or someone that's just there that has had experience with the medicine and is going to just help you through the journey. And also after the experience is over, they are also going to help you integrate that experience. So that is a huge thing that we talked about quite a lot, was that you can have these amazing eye-opening experiences. You can get all these cool downloads from the source or from your spirit or whatever on things that you should be doing differently, or just releasing emotions that you've been holding on to for a long time. But if you don't understand how to integrate that into your day-to-day life, then there is going to be no benefit from doing these plant medicines. So integrating is part of the experience and is super, super important. And then it is also important that when you are in the ceremony or taking the plant, you really want to just surrender to the plant and let it take you where you need to go. So it's really important that you try not to resist it. You try to be very in your body, not in your head, and you just go with it. The plant spirit always knows exactly what one needs to see, feel, hear, experience, and learn. And so it's super important that you just trust the whole experience, because it is very different for each person, which is very cool to see. So because these plants, I think like in like the shamanic cultures, which is where they come from, these plants are seen as super, super powerful. And so they're often looked to as like the goddesses or the gods. And there are many different types. There's probably about like 5 or 6 that are quite well known. I'm sure there's some out there that we haven't even discovered yet, but ayahuasca is probably the most common one that is known to like the majority of people. I wouldn't say that it's the most commonly done, and it's definitely the most out of body experience that you can have. But there's ayahuasca, there's iboga, there's a San Pedro cactus, which is what I partake in, and it's called wachuma. And then there's also psychedelic mushrooms. Even those aren't considered a plant exactly. They do get into the category of just a healing ceremony, and it still comes from the earth, so we can call it a plant. And then there's also the peyote cactus, and then there's also another one called salvia. So that's kind of like what plant ceremonies are, I guess. But they are just there to help you and show you what you need to hear or to learn or to release. And so, yeah, hopefully that kind of gives you guys a brief understanding. It's definitely done. And now I'm going to like go into more a little bit about just like my personal experience with I actually did 2 different healing ceremonies over the weekend. And so I want to just kind of back up a little bit, I guess, and just share how I got into this in the first place. And I have been on a little bit of a spiritual path, spiritual awakening for, like I said, 4 years. And just working through that a lot, getting to know myself better, getting to learn to understand how to listen to my soul and what it actually wants and what it needs. And done a lot of work with that. But one of the biggest game changers for me has been body work. And I think I've probably mentioned this on here before when talking about like my autoimmune disease, psoriasis, because I started that body work with the hopes of healing that. And so I hired a bodywork specialist. She is a very near and dear friend now, and that's actually who I was able to go to the ceremony with. And so she's been doing body work on me for about 1.5 years. And the purpose of body work is, even just because I was a bodybuilder and so I was lifting a lot, maybe not properly recovering all of the time, you have lots of scar tissue in your body. And almost everybody has a lot of scar tissue. I would say it's very hard not to have any scar tissue in today's world, just because it is our body's defense mechanism when going up against just like toxins in our environment, in our food, anything that we did that we didn't recover well from, any injury that we've had, anything like that, your body is going to develop some scar tissue around those areas. So when I first started doing this body work with her, she started working on my hips and my lower back the most, just because that's where she, essentially the reason I started going to her was because of my gut and trying to heal my gut. And so there was scar tissue like all wrapped around my intestines, my colon, all of that. And it was just a little bit of a mess in there. And also we can store emotions in that scar tissue. And when I first started getting into yoga, like it was 3 years ago, I was still living in Edmonton, and I would just start going to yoga after each of my gym sessions, or in the morning or whatever. And so I was doing yoga for about 4 times a week. And I can remember just in like certain positions in yoga or after doing certain flows and stuff, I would get like this lower back. It wasn't like a seize, but it was just really hard to explain. But I had to basically stop what I was doing. I had to lay on my back and I just had to sit there, and it would go away after about like 2 to 3 minutes. But it was just a very weird sensation. And I couldn't really explain it to anyone, but I just told the yoga teacher, I just need to take 5. And so that kept happening anytime I would do yoga. And I didn't really think too much of it. But when I started to go and see my body work girl, she she didn't explain to me, but she made me very aware of what that was. So essentially, I had so much scar tissue in my lower back that when she began to work on it, it was literally like the energy was being released from breaking down that scar tissue, because I was holding so much energy in that scar tissue. And that is essentially what was happening to me in yoga, is when I would just start like moving my back in a way that it never really had been moved, it started to kind of like loosen up that scar tissue a little bit, and energy started to release, which is why I would have that weird lower back spasm in yoga. And so she worked on that a lot. And I actually have had 2 huge energy releases while she have done body work on me. So it's actually my very first experience with her, my very last, and I have been doing it for about 1.5 years. And so my very first experience, she opened up my hips. So she does a very deep tissue massage. She uses her elbow, she uses all of her might, and she essentially got into my hips. And it's very hard to explain without sounding crazy. And I think it's just hard to explain. But essentially, releasing that energy for the first time, I had an out-of-body experience. So it felt like I left my body. I was convulsing. I felt like my whole body was almost levitating. I was numb. And it's just because there was so much stored energy in there that I had released. And so it was a crazy experience. I was like screaming, crying, laughing. I didn't know what it to feel like. And so that was the very first time I worked with her. And then after we did that for the next 1.5 years, we just focused on, because it was such a big energy release, there was still lots of scar tissue there, but I never had another experience like that. And then this last time, she did a treatment on my face. And so she literally was elbowing my head, like under my eyes, like on my cheekbones, my low, like the outlines of my jaw. She was like massaging that with her elbow, and it freaking hurts, you guys. Like, it is the most painful thing. And that's the thing about it, is once you pass your leverage point of pain, of like what you consider to be what you think is the most amount of pain you can take, you instantly, after you pass that threshold, go into emotion. And so your body doesn't interpret it as pain anymore. It interprets it as emotions, and any emotions that you've been holding on to will come up. And so when she was doing this to my face, and I know this is hard to grasp your head around, I've explained it to a couple of my friends, and they're like, this is wild, Lacey. I don't really understand it. Why would you let someone elbow your face? But when you have one of these experiences, you kind of want it again, because it just makes a lot of sense. And I was definitely someone my whole entire life like held in my emotions. I know I told that story a couple times, where for like 7 years, me and my sister used to brag about being emotionless, which is not the case. We were definitely just suppressing. So I know I had a lot of emotions in there that I just kind of like stuffed down, suppressed, and forgot about. And so when she was doing the treatment on my face, again, this was probably a more intense experience. She had stopped, and I was sitting on the ground, like crying my eyes out, literally my body like shaking uncontrollably, like couldn't do anything about it. Again, my hands were very tingly. They felt like they were levitating. It was just like a crazy experience. So that is kind of what the plant medicine does to you. It gives you this out of body experience, and you release a lot of emotions, anything that you've been holding on to. It gives you a lot of clarity. You get downloads from your spirit or your soul, like telling you what you need to do, what you need to focus on. And when I had that last experience, she said, like, yeah, that's kind of like what plant medicine is like, but you don't have to have an elbow to your face. And I was like, perfect, like sign me up. I would love to have that without having to go through excruciating pain. And so that's kind of how my interest really sparked for this certain ceremony. And she's like, there's room for you. Like, I'd love for you to come, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, I'm going to just do it. And it's so funny because I tried to talk myself out of doing it so many times. And I was actually on this walk this one morning, and I was literally in mid thought of like, I'm not going to go. Like, I haven't heard back from them yet with any of the details. Like, it's coming up soon. I'm nervous. Like, I'm just like, I'm not going to go. There's no way. And literally while I'm in that thought, mid thought, I get an email, and the email is basically all of the details on the ceremony. And I was like, and I also never take my phone on my morning walk either. And so the fact that I just brought my phone that day, I was like mid thought of basically bailing out. And then I got all of the information that I was thinking about, that I was complaining about, that I hadn't received yet. I was like, okay, that's a sign from the universe that I just need to do this, even though timing isn't perfect, even though everything isn't perfect and lined up. I really took that as like a sign from the universe that this is what I was supposed to do. So I committed, and I also went with my friend who does the body work. And it's going to be a little bit hard for me to tell this story because a lot of it is to remain confidential just for the people that hosted the ceremony and everyone else that was obviously in that container with me. So I'm going to do my best to give you guys like a clear understanding and a picture without breaching anyone's confidentiality. That, I don't know if that's the right word I'm looking for, but and so what she had recommended is, she's like, the night before we are going to do Kambo, which is another ceremony. It's not necessarily a plant, but it does come from a frog. And so I'm just going to go into that a little bit. Basically, Kambo is just a detox, and you are supposed to eat really clean the week before you do any plant ceremonies, and each plant has a different protocol. So some plants that if you partake in the ceremony, you can only eat certain things. Sometimes it's just eating clean. There's not supposed to be any alcohol, booze, drugs the week before. So you're supposed to kind of detox your body. And the more detox your body is, the better reaction your body will have to the plant. And so she's like, we should just do Kambo because that's going to be a really good detox for our body. And then it'll give us a more, like a stronger experience with the plant. And at this point, I was just going with the flow. I said, whatever you say, we'll do it. So we go out, it's evening, we're going to go have our first Kambo experience. And we go into this, like, it's kind of like a barn, but it's like a house, but it's just like one big room. It's all like wooden. And there's just little mats on the floor. So there was 4 of us that did this ceremony. There's also probably 4 people in there that were just helping with us. And then there was also the shaman that was leading the experience. And so just a little bit of insight on like what Kambo is, I guess. It is a healing ritual used mainly in South America. It's named after the poisonous secretions of the giant monkey frog. And the frog secretes the substance as a defense mechanism to kill or to subdue animals that try to eat it. So it basically secretes this, and an animal tries to eat it and it gets poisoned and dies. So some humans, aka me, on the other hand, apply the substance to their body for its alleged health benefits. So indigenous people have used Kambo for centuries to heal and cleanse the body by strengthening its natural defenses and warding off bad luck. It was also believed to increase stamina. And so these days, when shamans or naturopathic practitioners still use it for cleansing the body of toxins, as well as treating numerous health conditions. So unfortunately, there's not a ton of research on Kambo, but it has been used, and there's lots of personal experience on it for, like I said, years. Like it's been used for centuries. So it is said to be helped with a range of conditions, including anxiety, cancer, Alzheimer's disease, addiction, chronic pain, hepatitis, HIV, AIDS, diabetes, depression, infections, infertility, rheumatism, and vascular conditions. So there's definitely a variety of benefits from Kambo, which is very cool. And I essentially just wanted to do it to detox. Obviously, I am also dealing with my autoimmune disease and a lot of gut issues, and it's supposed to just detox your gut, give it everything it needs. It can get rid of parasites. Like, it just seems like the best thing going, to be completely honest. But the process that in order to receive this is not super pleasant. So the first part of the process involves drinking about 1.5 liters of water. So we go in, there's 4 of us doing the ceremony, and we sit on our mats, and they kind of come around to us, like ask us what our intentions are, and like just our experience with us. So I said it was my first time, and they asked me what like my intention was, and I just told them, because literally the day before I found out that I had 2 parasites. So I was like, well, I just found out I have 2 parasites, so my intention is to kill those. And so they're like, okay, we're going to put it on your arm. And essentially what they do and stay with me because this is a little crazy, but they, based on what your intention is, they choose a part of the body where they're going to put the frog poison. And so what they do in order to be able to do that is they actually burn you. And so I have like 4 little burns. I don't think you guys will be able to see this if you're listening to my podcast, but I'm going to show it anyways. So I have 4 little burns there, which is what they burned me with on my upper shoulder. So my upper left shoulder, like my calf, I have 4 little dots, and they just basically burned me with a match. So they basically like lit a match, put it out right away, and then just like kind of like burnt your arm. It didn't hurt at all. It was very quick. And then what they do is they put the Kambo on the burn, and then your body absorbs it through that. So the blistered skin is then scraped off, and the Kambo is applied to the wounds. And then from the wound, the Kambo enters the lymphatic system and the bloodstream, where it is said to race around the body, basically scanning for problems. And it results in some side effects when it finds a problem. And so one of the side effects is essentially vomiting or just purging, which is the side effect that I had and that everyone in that room had. Was we just all purged and puked. So there was a couple other side effects, like you felt a little bit like numbness in your hands, you got red in the face, you just felt a little bit sick. And that was really the gist of it. Symptoms can range in severity based on what you're dealing with inside your body, but most people it just lasts like 15 to 20 minutes, which is all that it lasted for us. So it's very quick, and you essentially just get the Kambo applied to your arm. It races around your body, and then at the end of it, and then you just like puke for like 20 minutes and like purge, but the whole time you're like slamming water. So I probably slammed like 5 liters of water, and then you just keep like purging it up. So I know it sounds weird. That's because it is weird, but I love it. And I'm super excited to get some of my health tests back that kind of went into what my gut was doing, to see if this actually did do anything. And then so yeah, so that was kind of like my first experience the first night. And then basically you just like sit down after, everyone's there, they like sing songs, and it basically goes away. And like we drove away, like it's completely in and out. You don't really feel like high or anything like that. You just basically puke for 15 minutes and you get an amazing detox. So that was my first experience. And then went home, went to sleep, woke up, and then we traveled to the destination where we were going to have the second planet ceremony, which was the Washuma. And Washuma is crazy because it actually lasts 14 hours, well, like 12 to 14 hours. So it is an all-day thing. It's no 15-minute thing, unfortunately. not for unfortunately, you really have no concept of time, to be completely honest, when you are in a ceremony. So that's kind of how that went. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap up this episode here. And then I'm going to just make a part two so that they're not super long and dragged on, because I think that this might take me a minute to explain this. So hopefully you enjoyed this episode of just an introduction to what plant ceremony is and what Kambo, the frog poison, entails. And next week, I will release the episode on just my Washuma experience and what that looked like for me. So as always, if you have any questions about this at all, please send me a message. Again, some things do have to remain confidential. And I'm by no means encouraging anyone to do this or telling anyone to do this. I just, if you're interested and it intrigues you, do a little research. It's kind of cool. So I'll talk to you next week.